Hi everybody, it's Annette from The Art of Intuition, and today we are going to talk about timelines and why we're going to assume everyone's in our exact same timeline when not a lot of people are. This always comes up for me when I'm listening to any media where they're talking about different versions of something. You know, whether they're talking about different versions of a film where certain things were in a film or you distinctly remember certain things happening and they're like, oh, that never happened. When you talk to someone and historically they will say, well, this is how something happened, and you're like, well, I don't really remember it that way at all. I don't remember. Sometimes it can be big things you don't remember. Sometimes it can be like an ending of a movie you don't remember, the beginning of a movie that you don't remember it being like that at all. It can be a lot of different things that will trigger this for you, you know, where it's like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And like I said, sometimes it can be a big thing where I don't remember that graveyard being there. I don't remember that house being there. I don't remember any of this stuff being here. I don't know what's going on, you know, because we have this, our human assumption is we have a very linear life in a sense, you know, and from our human existence, from our human aspect, we do. We have A, B, C, and D because that's A, all we can see. So from our human perception, that's all we see. Is this the only way we can put it together is linearly. Whereas the more we expand out, the more we embody in our soul, we raise our consciousness, we then start embodying in that consciousness, our body vibration starts to raise. We start basically pulling our body into different timelines, right? And that's when things start to get wonky for us. Whether we're talking to someone and people remember things differently, or we just ourselves remember things differently. We don't remember certain things being a certain way or certain people acting a certain way. It's because we've shifted into a different timeline. One of the things then that we want to do sometimes when we get in that new timeline is try to re-anchor back to the old timeline. You know, we try to remember the old timeline. We try to go back to it. A lot of times we forget this stuff because it is what tethered us to that timeline. So all of a sudden, a lot of stuff you see, you start forgetting. I mean, you start to see this a lot at the end of just the natural human existence. You'll have a lot of times that people who are not going to ascend their consciousness here are going to go ascend somewhere else. And when they do that, they're going to transcend the human body in a sense through death. And toward the end, they forget stuff. You know, and usually it's the stuff they held the most dear at the end. That's like the last thing they forget. Those are all the things that tethered them to that body, tethered them to those realities. So over time, they just forget them. They technically have already started transitioning, and they just don't remember anything. And we see it so much, but because anything that happens when the human body gets older, it's always discounted as, oh, this is because it's old. You know, people are old and they don't remember all this stuff that starts happening to their body because they're old. You go to any doctor that's in their human aspect, and that's what you see all the time. You know, that's the whole mentality of everything. You know, and you read anything in that consciousness is when the body gets old, it breaks down. It starts breaking down because you start losing along the way, you start losing a lot of things. I'm going to say losing because the human aspect's going to see it as losing. You're going to start losing a lot of things along the way that kept you anchored into all these timelines, right? People are going to pass away. You know, your people are going to move away. Your grandchildren grow up. Your children grow up. All these things that anchored you in timelines, they just start to go away. You know, you might move from your house. You might go to a different place. And little by little, these things start to go. And people think we forget things because, you know, once again, because it's the aging process, the human body aging. We forget because the transition starts to begin. You know, the timelines start to, there are huge collectives that anchor into certain timelines where all this stuff starts to take place. You know, there's a huge one people would hit the age of 50. Where it's like, oh, it's a midlife crisis, you know, because all of a sudden they try to change everything that they'd been kind of disillusioned with for whatever reason. And because so many people hit it at the same time, because it was a certain marker in their DNA, a certain part of their timeline, of their higher timelines, that they would start breaking away from different things. It kind of gets a thing where it's everyone together. This happens at this age. Because a huge collective, that's what happened. You know, you see the same thing when you talk about everyone having the same symptoms of something. It becomes a pandemic because it's hitting everyone the same way around the same time period. So all of a sudden, that this is a you know, like a big collective thing. But our human existence, our human aspect never sees it as that. It always tries to lump everything together. But when we try to look at it from higher perception, you start to really see and understand that this is just the natural process of ascension. It's just starting getting carried out toward those latter years when that was the agreement. The agreement was not to ascend here. The agreement was not to ascend here in that body. It was to ascend another timeline in another body. So things start to detach and they start to pull away. Now, that will start happening to you when you're going through ascension and you agree to do it in your current physical body. It can start happening to you a lot younger. You're going to start to see all along your human lifespan, your human template, more of what I like to call it, because you complete the whole lifespan kind of in a really shorter period of time and go into a different template. It's basically what's going to happen, because you can't anchor in higher realities and stay in your human template, and that doesn't mean your human body. It just means your human template. Your templates get rewritten. And that's why the process can take such a long time. You start going into different realities where you remember things differently. Other people remember everything differently. And that can cause a lot of conflict. You see a lot of people arguing about it. Like, that movie didn't used to have that ending, or that looked like that got censored. I don't remember it that way. I don't remember why all this stuff is happening this way. Don't assume everyone's in your timeline. Stop assuming everyone's in your timeline. They are not. You're going to be in your own timeline, and if you've achieved certain levels of consciousness and you keep increasing your consciousness and you're doing it consciously, which means you're doing it intentionally, you're going to find you're going to flip and flop and jump into different realities all the time. What was reality one day won't be reality the next day. What'll be reality at 8 o'clock in the morning, and 30 minutes later, it's a totally different reality. People are not going to be in your same one. That's why we try not to promise a lot of things to people about what you're going to be able to do. Because you don't know until that moment if that's the timeline you're in. Is this what I'm going to be able to do? Is this what I'm supposed to do? And it's kind of fun to look at the different timelines. When we stop looking at how everyone else views them as right or wrong, but as just a different consciousness. They're in a different consciousness. They don't remember it that way. In truth, it didn't happen that way. It happened a whole different way. I did a whole video years ago about rewriting. We talk about rewriting your past. What does that really mean? And sometimes we do that consciously. We'll just start looking at something and breaking it down and applying a higher consciousness to it. And the more we keep applying a higher consciousness to it, it starts to morph into something else. And in a way, we rewrite it because we see it as what it was supposed to be, not from how our human perceived it. We start seeing it as differently. When we start exposing our DNA to higher consciousness material, our DNA starts to recode. It starts to trigger different DNA. Things that used to be one way, all of a sudden, we shift that DNA into something else. We talk a lot about our astrological signs and how that was important. You pick the sign you were going to be born into because at some point later on, that was going to, those purer aspects of that sign were going to what's going to get you through your ascension process. There's a reason why. Whatever you agreed to do. And we don't all have the same, we will all go through a similar ascension process. Maybe energetically, it'll be very similar. The realities we create to work through some of that stuff will all depend on different ways we decided to create realities. For some person, it might be job experiences that might get them to their awakening. For someone else, it might be a relationship that gets them to awakening. For someone else, it might be, the death of certain people that get them to their awakening process and then push them into their ascension process. Those can be, the situation's not what matters. It's the energy behind the situation. That's the most critical thing that we have to look at. It's the energy behind it. And everyone gets put in those things in different ways. But the more we embody in higher consciousness material, the more we allow higher consciousness things, whether it be crystals, andars, plants, meditations that shift your consciousness. But it's not just shifting it. It's shifting it and holding it. I see a lot of people who will want to shift it, but then they shift back and they want to go through their day and just be in their human aspect all day. That's not ascension. That is what some people would talk, some type of connection. It's the beginning. We all started somewhere. We all have to start somewhere to even realize we're not connected, to even take time to connect during the day and go, hey, I don't feel connected. Let me take time to connect. Because in the beginning, we can't even see that. We're like, I don't know what's going on. Why do I feel like that? I just feel like I'm disconnected. So a lot of times when we start really jumping quicker and noticing the discrepancies in so many timelines, and then you also notice other people talking about different things. And you're like, oh, I don't remember it that way. I don't remember if that was me or not. I don't remember if I was ever here. None of that even sounds true. But not to kind of look at that and make it an argumentative thing. You see so many people now and they want to fight about it and argue about what happened here. And sometimes even on a more global scale. You see the collectives doing it. It's like the whole thing, they pit everyone against each other, right? So you don't really have time to focus on your own process because you're too busy fighting everything outside. Try to control everything outside. Control is a big issue we have to give up because we don't have control over our ascension process. Our human body, our human aspect has no control over that. That's why it fights it so hard, because it doesn't like not having control. It wants to have control over that process all the time. It doesn't want to have to give that up. That's the one thing that keeps us bound to a lot of these human realities. So consider it a good thing, a very proactive thing, when all of a sudden you don't remember something the same way, or you don't remember it at all, and don't try to remember it. Believe me, if you're supposed to remember it, it'll pop back in. You won't have to remember. You won't have to try. You won't have to put all that willpower toward it. It'll just be there. If you need to convey the story to someone, or you want to sit there and explain to someone how something happened, or why something happened that way, and how you remember it, you remembered it that way at that time, but now you see it differently. When it's there to teach, when it's there to assist someone else, it'll be there. But in the meantime, if you can't remember it, don't do yourself the disservice to try to anchor it back in, or try to explain it to someone else on how or listen to someone else tell you how it was. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Every moment, technically you're in a different timeline. Every moment you're in a new reality. What are you going to make today? I see a lot of people that get kind of into creation and what they're going to be able to create. But a lot of times we don't like having to rework what we've already made or just close it down. That's where a lot of people start to fight against the process. That's where I started to fight against the process, because I didn't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to, because we have some type of attachment to a lot of that stuff. We have an identity to it, and all that stuff has to go. We have to shed all that stuff. So when we start shedding all that stuff, there can be a bite back, in a sense, to that. Our human aspect doesn't want to give that up. It doesn't want to have to say goodbye to these things. And at the end of the day, at the end of the timeline, we have to say goodbye to it. These timelines were not forever. We stretch them out. We get them to last. We hold these realities in place until we can't hold them anymore. And that's when they were meant to be done anyway. So, okay. Keep practicing the art of intuition.